Hey, I don't know if you've noticed or if you've seen this on the BBC. So on the BBC, they started, it's almost a year ago now, they started a department in May 2023, and it was called BBC Verify. So they had to, in response to what was going on culturally, they realized they needed to sort of set up a separate team and a separate department. And it was in response to the exponential growth of fake news, deep fakes, AI, manipulated content, distorted videos, and how it can no longer be relied upon, that seeing is believing. You might have even seen in the news, even in the last couple of days, remember, Oprah's just been deep faked, and a number of other people have just been, videos have been made of them endorsing some guy they were not even part of, and so all of a sudden there's this culture that we live in which fake news isn't new, because it's been going on for a long time. People spread lies back in the Roman days about other people. So fake news as an idea isn't new. But what is very new for us culturally is when you see something, it's very hard now to tell if it actually is what you're seeing, if it's being reported in the way that accurately took place. So the BBC set up this thing called BBC Verify, and what they said was this. They put this quote out. This was a statement they put out when they started it. Audiences are constantly bombarded with mis- and disinformation, fake images, including those generated by AI, and they're telling us that amidst the noise and sensationalism, they need to see our workings so we can maintain the trust that people have put in the BBC for the past 100 years. People want to know not just what we know, but how we know it. I want to focus on that last line as they just wrapped up what they said. People want to know not just what we know, but how we know it. And I just think, have you ever applied that to faith? Where people around us, they sometimes they want to know what we know, but they want to know how you've come to that belief. How you actually, how? Like how have you connected the dots between that and that? Like how? How? And people want to know not only what we know, but they want to know how we believe it. And I think when it comes to, when we wrestle with this, when we wrestle with the how we know it, then we're better equipped to explain the why behind it, okay? So when we wrestle with the how we know it, we are better equipped to explain the why we believe it. And so for all of us who are followers of Jesus, this is going to be an important series. This will be really, really important for us as we do this study over the next sort of 5-6 weeks. The thing is, just take for a moment, maybe your friends or neighbors or people at college or other, university discussions took place like this. Are you expected just to believe something that you read that was put together in this book and it's like thousands of years old? And these people were all superstitious. You just have to travel to any museum anywhere around the world and look at people that lived a long time ago. They believed in 7-headed lizards, and they believed that if they ran around naked in a field, then the rain would fall. They did things that they believed anything almost. They were so superstitious. So why should we believe something that was written at a time when everybody had amulets and household gods? Why would we believe something that was written at a time when everybody believed everything? And we didn't have any science back then. Scientists thought you stuck a leech on somebody to suck out the bad stuff. We've moved on. We've grown up, right? We've developed, so why would we still believe in something that was written thousands of years ago and expected to just throw all of our trust in it? Is that the way it works? And if we wrestle with what it means to really, really trust, and maybe those people in your life have asked you those types of questions. Maybe you've asked those types of questions. Maybe you've wondered those types of things, We wrestle with it, don't we? And sometimes it doesn't make sense to them, sometimes it doesn't make sense to us, if we're honest, right? If we're really honest. And we're going to do this series now. This series is based on a series from NorthPoint in Atlanta. And as a local church, we're connected to, as you know, the Further Faster Network. And part of being connected into the Further Faster Network allows us the opportunity to use and share resources with one another. And this series is a series, it's not original, we haven't made it up, but it's come from NorthPoint, the home from Atlanta, the city where I'm from. So we've been able to use this, and we're using their materials and we're adapting them here. So if you think it's really clever, it's obviously not me. If you think it's really stupid, it's obviously not me either, okay? So yeah, so just to be clear about that. But ultimately, here's what it is. If you are a follower of Jesus, my heart is that this series will equip you in your faith and in your evangelism. So when you have conversations with your neighbors, when you have discussions with those people in your life who are not followers of Jesus, which I hope you do have people in your life who are not followers of Jesus, and I hope you have people in your life who ask awkward, uncomfortable, difficult questions. If you're not, you're living in a bubble, okay? I hope you're around people who are not saved and who don't yet know Jesus. And hopefully this series will help equip you and develop and entrench your faith into something solid that you'd feel in 5 weeks' time, 6 weeks' time. Yes, as we build up to Easter, you really feel like, you know, the foundation of my faith is a bit more solid. But maybe if you're here, you're watching on demand, if you're watching this morning and you're not yet a follower of Jesus, I hope this will also be helpful to you, because then you will understand the how we believe in the first place, which is important for all of us to wrestle with. So I hope that this series will be empowering and equipping for all of us, no matter what stage we are at. Now, the Christian faith stands or falls on only one thing. It's not the collection of books. That falls and stands on the one thing, and that one thing is a person. Because without Jesus, none of this would have ever even happened. And the Bible you read would not even exist. Okay, this is a little bit of a history lesson. We're going to go sort of back in time, if you like. So I hope you can see it on the slides. So there was an event that took place in the first century. That event was Jesus rising from the dead. Okay, if he didn't come back from the dead, the story would be over. There'd be no point of doing anything else. There'd be no point of telling everybody what happened and confirming, because he would have just proved himself to be a liar and a charlatan, because he said he was going to die and he said he was going to come back to life, and then he came back to life. There was this event that happened. There's a resurrection. Now, after the resurrection, there was this thing called the Way, which is totally cool for all of you Star Wars fans. The Way. And it was known as the Way for quite a long time. And it was meaning you follow the way of Jesus, or the way of the Lord. And this was this first century movement. This movement became the Way. It could be an indie rock band as well, I guess, couldn't it? You know, but anyway, the Way. So we had this Way, it was this movement. And during this time, people began to document it. And the movement included people like Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, all of these people that you know, Mary, Martha. There were lots of people that were included in these stories. They became Paul, became Barnabas, Silas, all these characters that you read about in the second half of your Bible. These were people that were involved in the movement. They were involved in the Way, this thing that was moving forward. And near the end of their lives, they began to document, they began to write down the stuff that took place. And then in the 4th century, okay, so the 4th century, that's 300 years later, the Bible as you know it was put together. So they weren't actually reading a Bible, because there was no Bible at the time. The Bible itself didn't exist in that way. They had the Old Testament scriptures, which was the first half of your, if you have a Bible, the first half of that. There's the Old Testament stuff, but it wasn't actually put together until the 4th century. 300 years later, it was put together. And now here's what we have to see. Now, they think, well, why is that important to understand? Because when you're talking to your friends, and when you're talking to family members, when you're talking to your loved ones, There's a big shift between understanding that the story of Jesus is not merely a story in the Bible. Jesus is the only reason that there is a Bible. Now, all of these things here in terms of events, these are agreed upon by, hands down, secular historians, archaeologists. They agree. Now they might not agree that Jesus rose from the dead, but they do agree there was some type of an event. Here's how they know there was something that happened. Because for some reason, there's a lot of documents about a nobody from a no-place town in the backwater woods of beyond. And there are reams and reams and reams of archaeological evidence to back up that something happened. Now, whether or not you agree with whether that Jesus rose from the dead, I'm just saying historians agree that this process, what we've just talked about now, is the way it happened. It is what took place. So without Jesus, there would actually be no Bible in and of itself. So therefore, if even one of the Gospels, even if one of these records of the life of Jesus is a reliable account, then we should lean in to discover what it says about Jesus. See, the question shouldn't be whether there's a God or not, or is the Bible even true. It should be, okay, is what they wrote true? Are these reliable accounts? Are these first-hand eyewitness accounts reliable accounts on the life of Jesus? Because it's these first-hand accounts that give us the life of Jesus. They're the things that tell us about the life of Jesus. And since our faith is built on, anchored to, linked to, held together by the person of Jesus, it's worth looking into the person of Jesus and investigate whether or not these are reliable accounts. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to go through the book of Luke, picking out some stories and stuff like that. We're going to go through the book of Luke in the next sort of 5 to 6 weeks, all the way running up to Easter. And we're going to investigate what he saw and wrote and ask if we can even trust it and discover how we know and why we believe. So, everybody should have got a copy of the book of Luke. You've got a copy of the book of Luke. The reason I wanted to do him like this, and if you're watching online and you don't have a copy, please message us. We will post you one free of charge. This was how Luke originally wrote it. It was a book. It was his account. And so throughout this series, I'd encourage you, look, read it. You know, you're sitting on the train heading into work, just pick it out, read a couple chapters. You're sitting at home, getting ready for bed, maybe read it. Maybe in the morning you get up and you make a coffee and you have your quiet time. I don't know, read it. Maybe you just want to go sit outside for a little bit and just read it. You know, mark on it, scribble on it. You have permission, this is yours, okay? And just wrestle with it. You know, is there something in there that you're like, that's weird? Circle it, you know, put a big question on that page. Is there something that like, oh my gosh, mind blown? Put a star on that page. You know, this is for you to chew on, to wrestle with, to digest, you know, to almost, you know, eat it, okay? Get into it, you know? Read it like it was originally written, an individual book, someone writing about their account. You're reading what Luke wrote to find out what Luke thinks and what Luke saw and what Luke took note of. Now, we know a little bit about Luke. So we know this. Luke was, he was not one of Jesus' original gang. And the reason he wasn't one of Jesus' original gang, one of the reasons, of course, was he wasn't Jewish. He was an outsider. He was a Gentile. He wasn't part of the in crowd. And Jesus' first original gathering of people, because he came first to the Jews and then to the Gentiles, and that just means he came first to this people group, and everybody else was a Gentile. So if you weren't Jewish, you were an outsider, okay? So as far as I know, I think that applies to most of us in the room. I could be wrong. But if you weren't Jewish, then you were an outsider or a Gentile. And Jesus came first to the house of Israel, and then the gospel went out. So Luke is not one of the insiders. Luke is not one of the Jewish boys. He's not one of the people who's been along since the beginning. Luke is a Greek. Luke is a outsider. Luke is a Gentile. Luke, years ago, would have been viewed as somebody who was unclean, who they wouldn't sit down and eat with, who they wouldn't be seen with, who they wouldn't talk to, they wouldn't do business with. They definitely would not call him brother or part of the family. He was an outsider. See, but something radical happened. An event which sparked a movement, which broke down barriers, which caused something cataclysmic to occur, which people have now written about. And that's what he's doing. He's writing about it. We know a little bit about this guy, Luke. We also know that the analysis of his writing style, so people that are more clever than me, I found this out on Encyclopedia Britannica, actually. His writing style, he's obviously an educated man. Because of the language he uses, the words that he uses, and the way it was written, he was an educated man. So they know that he was an educated man. He's referenced as known as being a doctor. In the book of Acts, he's given a title. He's called the beloved physician. Maybe, physicians are usually quite particular. And then the incredible thing about Luke is Luke wrote also the book of Acts. And in the book of Acts, there's passages that talk about he changes from the first voice, I, and then it says to we. And so he's writing something now, but the second story of Acts, which we're not going to look at the moment, but anyway, he wrote that book as well. He wrote a big chunk of what we now call the Bible. He wrote the book Luke and the book of Acts. And as far as we can tell, he wasn't even a religious person originally. But something happened in his life to change it, So Luke wasn't, with Luke being an outsider, you have to recognize then from the author's perspective, if you're trying to prove something because you have an insider's opinion, you actually don't have objectivity. Right? Does that make sense? I could write to you about how Manchester United is the world's greatest football team. Obviously, some of you would tell me about the Fulham result. Anyway, I wouldn't have objectivity, right? If you have a bias, you don't have an objectivity. Luke is an outsider, not an insider. What's crucial to understand there is, of course, Luke's not writing to sort of prove an internal bias. Luke is documenting objectively. And he tells us so in the beginning. As we get going, Luke tells us that that's what he's doing. And he does this in his introduction. It's in Luke 1:1. You can look at it in your book. I've got it on the screen as well, and it says this. First verse, many have undertaken. This is his introduction. It was a dark and stormy night. Once upon a time, many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that were handed down, the things that have been fulfilled among us. Many. We're just going to pause there for a moment. How many people are going to write a book about you? Probably not many. Most of us are going to be gone. We get a good 70, 80, 90 years run of it. And then we're gone. Y'all, we don't stick around in this mortal coil forever. And there's not many, I don't presume, that are going to write books about my life. And again, historians, archaeologists, Christian or not is irrelevant, agree with this next bit I'm going to explain to you, which is really important. Not many wrote about people in ancient times. There's not many books, there's not many biographies about other people in ancient times. You have to piece together the bits that happened for Tiberius Caesar. There's no single one volume about the life of Tiberius Caesar, for example. Virtually nothing is written about Pilate. What we know about Herod the Great is collected from different fragments and different bits. There's not like one book about Herod the Great. There's certainly not a book that talks about their life, their upbringing, their teaching, their style, the things that they did. Hands down, if you study literature from an objective point of view, something happened in the first century And the literature arena, the biography arena, became flooded with the stories of a Nazarite leader of a small group of people that everybody thought was some weird, goofy cult. But for some reason, account after account after account were written about the life of Jesus. You can study the history of biographies, and you'll discover that, whether you're Christian or not. This is fact. This is the way biography developed. So it's really, really interesting. You know, there's not many detailed accounts of somebody who was an ancient peasant, crucified criminal. Why would you write anything about an ancient peasant, crucified criminal, unless something happened? There was an event that happened, which cataclysmic event, which changed everything that they had been part of before. Something happened, you know? I mean, shouldn't you ask, just reading this book, okay, Luke, why in the world are you telling us that many have undertaken? Why are you telling us that many have undertaken to draw up an account? It's because something amazing had happened. And that event has implications for all of us. And Luke is saying it like this. He's like, hey, I'm not the first person to write this. I'm not the first person to put this down. I'm not the first person to even try to do it. Which isn't something you say if you're trying to make a story up. Is it? Long, long ago in a galaxy far, far away. You make that up. You don't say, hey, this is my account, and many others have also written about it as well. From the start, he's telling us he's writing about something that he believes is an actual account, an actual event, an actual thing. He carries on with this introduction. He says this about the many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were like eyewitnesses and servants of the Lord. He's saying, I've got eyewitnesses to these events. He's writing his account, and whether it's reliable or not, he's trying to tell you this is how, and this is why I've written it this way, and just as they were handed down to us, and this is the things that have been fulfilled among us. He's going on. He's basically saying, I've got witnesses. He's saying, check it out, verify my claims, BBC Verify. He's like saying, verify it, investigate what I write. Go ask them for yourselves. Did you know out of all of the Gospels, we got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Matthew, Mark, and John have nowhere near the amount of detail for specific names, people, and places that Luke does. When Luke writes about somebody, he tells us it's Zacchaeus, the chief tax collector, and he tells you the town. It's like giving somebody his name, occupation, and address. He does it all the time. When he talks about geography, Luke lists specific people, specific places, specific events. This river, this mountain, this sea. And the geography matches up to the geography. Luke goes into specifics, more specifics than anybody else. Luke goes into so much more detail. And Luke also, which is a cool aside, Luke also writes about the outsider more than the others. Luke writes about the widows. Luke writes about those who are on the fringes of society. He records Jesus' experience with those who are on the outside so much more than those who were on the inside, or more than the other stories that we have in the other Gospels. Why? Because Luke knows exactly what it feels like to be on the outside. We know these things just based on the history. And Luke carries on to say, and he said, but hey, don't just take my word for it. Don't just take their word for it. He goes on and he says in the next verse, you can read it yourself, I have myself carefully investigated everything from the beginning. Luke is checking it out from the beginning. And Luke brings us the story of the birth of Jesus from the beginning. Luke is the one that does that. Luke is the one that tells us the details of the birth. He tells us about John the Baptist. He tells us about the birth of Jesus. he tells us about the announcement. He's going back as far as he can to tell us everything he can. I'm taking the time to investigate it carefully from the beginning. And then it carries on. He says, everything from the beginning. You can read it as well. It says, I carefully investigated everything from the beginning. I, too, have decided to write an orderly account. Again, many. I, too, have decided to write an orderly account. We've got to pause there because this is something that we can miss. This is the second time he uses the word account. He used it at the beginning, and he uses it now in verse 3. An account is a specific term, a specific Greek term. In the Greek, it's the word diegesis. It's in its original language, in its original usage, when you wrote a diegesis, you were giving a full report. And some people don't refer to the book of Luke as a gospel. They actually refer to the book of Luke as a report, an account. Nowhere in his writing does he call it a gospel. The others do. The others call their own books gospels. He doesn't call his a gospel. He actually calls his an account, a full report. He does it twice in the introduction there, verse 1 and verse 3. He writes it twice. And in the ancient time, one of the ways you gave a full report, to give a full report, was to record not only what the person did, but what the person said. And only when you had done that did you give a proper full report. If you look at other ancient documents, the way it was used, that was what qualified something as a full report. Luke's telling us twice at the beginning in his introduction, this is why I'm doing it. He wasn't writing to answer, did it happen? Okay, many eyewitnesses were still alive. He tells us that. He didn't write to say, okay, this is what really took place. He's trying to, because you could speak to them yourselves. What he's trying to do is to tell people what happened and what does that matter to us. That's really where he's going with it. He's not writing to try to prove the thing. He's just trying to record the thing. Do you understand the difference there? So he's not also writing the Bible. He had no idea that 300 years later, his little book would one day be included in the world's ever bestseller. He had no idea that what he was writing would last for centuries. He had no idea. He had no idea. He wasn't writing it to prove something. And it was only later when the Bible became a thing that Luke's account became something other than just a meticulous investigator documenting his details, doing his research. And here's why it's important for us. And this is why I wanted everybody to have an individual copy. I wanted you to understand it like this. And it's kind of like passport sized as well. Luke's account isn't reliable because it's in the Bible. His account is actually included in the Bible because it's reliable. Luke's account isn't reliable because it's now been added to the Bible. Luke's account was added to the Bible because it was reliable. Here's another way to think about it. I told you it was like a passport size. When you go on holiday, you ever been on one of those holidays and you go to the hotel room and it's got a little safe, somewhere, or in the caravan there's one of those little safes. And in that safe, you put your passport, maybe a watch, maybe a phone, I don't know. You put stuff in the safe. You might put some of your travel money. I mean, if that's still a thing anymore. I used to get traveler's checks. Remember those? Oh, my word. Yeah, anyway. For those of you, everyone here should know what a traveler's check is, right? Yeah. There's no teenagers in the room. Everybody understands what I'm talking about, right? So you put stuff in the safe. The safe did not make my stuff valuable. It was valuable, and therefore it was put in the safe. So this is what's going on with Luke. It's not all of a sudden valuable because the book of Luke is in the Bible. No. It was valuable before, and that's why it's been put into the Bible. That's the safe. The Bible is the safe. And Luke's account is reliable and trustworthy, and therefore, because there were other accounts, he tells us there were loads of accounts, there's many of accounts, and we only have a handful left that we have kept over the years, because some of the others were not reliable. For whatever reason, they were not reliable accounts. So they weren't included. They weren't eyewitnesses in the same way. They didn't do the same level of research in the same way. So they weren't included in the Bible. Does that make sense? So Luke's account was reliable and trustworthy, and therefore it became included in the Bible. So when you struggle with your faith, or when you have family members or people in your life and you're sort of wrestling with faith, you can come back to, is Luke's account reliable? Is what Luke wrote reliable? Is what Luke wrote reliable? Because if he did, and if he really investigated stuff the way he says he did, there's no reason to think that he didn't, but if he did, then you and I should lean in. You and I should lean in to find out more about what Luke is written. And if it's good for you, it's good for your family, and it's good for the world. Because when we read Luke's account, it's clear Luke is absolutely confident in what he's writing about. Luke is absolutely confident about what it means for an outsider to be brought in. He's totally confident about it. He's absolutely confident about the stuff that's going on. And then let's look at this one last thing as we get ready to have to wrap up for time. This is what Luke says. He tells it because he wasn't writing this book to you and me. I mean, he had no idea that this book would be in our hands today. He's writing it specifically to somebody, and he writes this. He says, with this in mind, since I've carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I too have decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus. We don't really know who Theophilus was. There's a couple of clues. Most people think he was a Roman governor because of the title most excellent Theophilus. Most excellent was a title that was used. It's in other ancient literature when they refer to a Roman governor. The most excellent, it's like a preface to your title, if you like. And so they think he was potentially a Roman governor. And in the way he seems to have had wealth, because he was the benefactor. And maybe this guy Theophilus had been hearing these stories about Jesus. Maybe he'd been curious himself. Maybe he'd been wondering what it was about. Maybe he wondered if the claims were true, if there really was a new way of living, a new way of discovering, if God was different to what you'd thought all the years before. If he was no longer some amulet or something that you burned fire to or something that is it all different that God became man and gave his life for us? Maybe he's questioning things and wanting to know more about this stuff that he's heard about. And so it seems like he commissioned Luke to write the book. Because think about it. This is another reason historians are baffled by the amount of books that are written about Jesus in an ancient era. Because paper is cheap nowadays for us. It's cheap. Back then, people who could write, people who could read, people who had parchment was a thing of a class, a thing of expense. It was costly. You know, we could all publish our own books today. You know, there's plenty of self-published websites. Click, 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 click. You could just make up something and write it, yeah? Paper's cheap. They didn't have paper like we have paper. So it was a costly thing to do. So this benefactor is paying for Luke to do an orderly account. An orderly account. And therefore, Luke carries on, with this in mind, since I have carefully decided to investigate everything from the beginning, I too have decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things that you have been taught. In those first 4 verses, Luke's introduction, he writes this book for a very clear aim. I'm going to investigate the facts. I'm going to do some research. I'm going to find out what's been going on. Why am I going to do that? So you will know with certainty what you have been taught. So you, Theophilus, will know what you have been taught. In other words, he's saying it's true. Some people would say that these original writers of the Bible were out to just defraud people or some grand conspiracy, right? They're just making all these stories up to trick the world into believing about it. But Luke isn't interested in talking to the world. Luke is talking to Theophilus. Luke's talking to one man. So one guy could know the certainty. And Luke had no idea what would happen next. He had no idea that his account would be copied meticulously over and over and over. He had no idea that 300 years later it would be added into a book called the Bible. He had no idea that years later people would tell the stories that he recorded again. Stories of the Good Samaritan. Stories of a tax collector climbing a tree. He had no idea that the things he wrote would now be shared all over the world. It's crazy. He never thought anybody would memorize what he wrote. Who writes a book thinking people all around the world are going to now make it something that you memorize? He never thought that all around the world, at the age of 4, kids are going to wear towels on their head and say, "For unto you this day in the city of David is born." He never knew that he was writing the script for the nativity play. He never knew that. What he did know was, I'm going to take the time to find out how we believe and why we believe, and I'm going to give it to you, Theophilus. You're my patron. You're my benefactor. You're funding this research, and I'm putting it together for you. I've investigated this orderly account. I'm going to find out about what everything was and what it was. He's writing it so we can trust it. He's writing it so we can trust it. And so over the next 6 weeks, I want you to sit up. And I want you to we're just going to jump into this book of Luke. Dig into it. You've got it with you. You can read it. You can study it yourself. And please, 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 don't just throw out the Bible because you think, oh, I can't trust it. Here's what I'm asking you to do. Trust Luke. Trust Luke. Lean in to what Luke wrote. And if you choose to walk away from Jesus because he's inconvenient and costly, that's fine. As we read through the stories in the Gospels, a lot of people walked away from Jesus because it was too costly. And if you find that following Jesus is too costly and you choose not to follow Jesus, that's your choice. And I get that. But please don't be one of those people who just says, I don't believe anything in the Bible, and throw out the whole Bible. Just carte blanche, no, I don't believe it. None of it's true. Okay, if you want to walk away because Jesus is too costly and too demanding on your life, that's okay, because you don't have to pay the price unless you choose to follow. But don't just throw the baby out with the bathwater. Don't just be like, oh, I don't believe it, because none of it's true, none of it's verifiable. Take the time to dig into it and wrestle with it. Wrestle with it. Because Luke added up all of his findings, and he comes to this incredible conclusion that will change your life. Because when you investigate Jesus the way Luke did, you'll discover it will change your life. Luke spoke to eyewitnesses. He told us that in the beginning. He spoke to people who were around. And when we wrestle with how we know it, we are better equipped to explain why we believe it. When we wrestle with the how we even know this stuff, we're better equipped to explain why we believe it. And that's what I want us to do for the next 5-6 weeks. Wrestle with the how and equip us to better explain the why. I'm going to need to wrap it up and pray for us now if we can. Father God, thank you for this morning. Thank you for everybody here, whether they're online or in the room, God. I just thank you so much for everybody. God, thank you that this book survived. Thank you that Luke wrote this book. We thank you that we have minds where we can be critical and we can be thinkers and we can really wrestle with this stuff. I just ask you, give us all a willingness to learn and study. Help us to know, like Theophilus discovered, that Jesus, you're worth putting our trust in, that we can know for certain who you are. Allow us to know more about who Jesus was and is through the eyes of the people who knew him when he walked this earth. And God, help us to have the courage to follow him, not just for us, but for the sake of the world. Father, in your name we pray. Amen. Thank you so much. Have an awesome time. If you have any questions about this, please come and chat to us. We will be digging into this series, as I say, for the next 5 or 6 weeks. At 12 o'clock, if you've got children in Superstars, you'll need to go collect them, which is in just a couple minutes. Otherwise, please stick around, grab another coffee, hang out. Yeah, cool. And we will carry this on next week. Thank you.